So in the next video, I would like to discuss with you the topic on the king in the center. As you know, I've also been recording a DVD on this matter, but I nevertheless thought it's good to remind you about this because it's a recurring theme in any game. It's all about getting your king into safety from the early stage on, and it has still been neglected by even very strong grandmasters. And the following game is a good example of that. It's the game from Bundesliga between Richard Rapport and Matthias Bluebaum. We have a French opening, e4, e6, d4, d5. And now a lot of people would think, okay, now it's getting boring, as white is going to take on d5. We get the exchange variation of the French symmetrical pawn structure. But in fact, symmetrical pawn structures are more dangerous than you may think. It's one of the reasons why the line in the Berlin with rook e1 has been tried by many white players. But there are also a lot of other examples. Especially in symmetrical positions, it's all about who is more active. And that is very simple, because you have only one open file and you should try to occupy it as quickly as possible. And if you are the one who's occupying the open file and getting your pieces out actively, yeah, then you have good chances of seizing the initiative. Of course, if everything is kind of neutral and both sides are developing in same style, yeah, then it's very likely that it could become very boring. But for the moment, there's still a lot to be done. A lot of pieces which need to be developed, and it's actually interesting to see that a very strong grandmaster like Matthias Bluebaum is getting crushed in 18 moves. That's not something you see every day. So let's see what goes wrong for black in this example. Knight f3, black goes knight c6. Okay, I'm not an expert on the French, I know this move exists, but there are a lot of other continuations as knight f6 or bishop d6 are playable. That is for theoreticians to figure out what is best. White goes knight c3, and black can of course go for something like knight f6 and try to play in a symmetrical way. But black goes for bishop b4, bishop to d3, knight g e7. Okay, in general, knight on e7 is not the most active piece. Usually f6 is a better square, but there are pros and cons of developing your knight to such a square. Whenever you go to f6, you need to reckon with a pin. Whereas now a move like bishop g5 makes less sense, because black can always play a move f6 to unpin the knight. And also from e7 on, the knight can go to g6 or even prepare the exchange of the bad bishop, let's say with a move like bishop f5. Castle kingside, and well, here black could also consider a move like castle kingside, and then the theory would continue with knight e2. This is interesting maneuver. Black didn't capture on c3, so black will have to deal with some ideas like knight g3. The knights are nicely placed on that side of the board. Of course, there are ideas of building up an attack whenever you have so many pieces there. Also, a move like c3 becomes useful, and it could very well be that black's knights are a little bit inferior placed to white's knights. But that's not obvious at all. This was actually seen in some other game of Rapport as well. Black went for the move bishop g4. Ambitious move, trying to win the pawn on d4. So that also explains why black doesn't capture on c3. White would get a double pawn on the c file, but there are also some benefits to this structure. Pawn on d4 is well defended, and in some cases you can also consider using the absence of black's dark squared bishop by going with your own bishop to a3. Rook b1 could be an idea in some cases. So there are always some pros and cons. Black went for bishop g4, and the move h3 was played. Bishop to h5, and the key is that, okay, let's say if you take on f3, I will take with the queen back. You can take on d4, but the problem is that you have so many unprotected points in your position. That's something you always need to reckon with. Also, the king safety plays a lot of role, so you should always look at checks, look at vulnerable points in your opponent's position, unprotected pieces, weak pawns. That's what's happening very often. And here, I think you can just play queen g4, and there are some issues with your pieces on the 4th rank, but also pawn on g7 is hanging. So that's why black goes for the move bishop h5 instead. White played a3, asking the bishop to make a decision. And okay, I think that black should have made a decision here by taking on c3. Now he's going back to d6 in the game, and I believe you lose some valuable time. But by taking on c3, you're forcing white to recapture, of course, which also costs an extra move. Not that it's such a bad thing, but now if you play something like queen d7, you still have a lot of options to get a game. Just to castle kingside, play bishop g6 for instance. Castle queenside is another option. But you save a lot of time by capturing yourself. After bishop to d6, white actually went for the move rook e1. And this is actually an interesting moment, because it feels to me that white is just a lot faster than black in this example. If we do the count, white has already castled, has developed 3 minor pieces. Black has developed 4 minor pieces. But in this case, you see it's quite problematic to get a king out of the center. Because if you would like to castle here, the problem is there's this thematical trick with the move bishop takes h7, the Greek gift. After king takes h7, there is knight to g5 check, threatening to regain the piece with a devastating attack. And whenever you play king to g6, I will just play g4, I win the piece back, and black's king is just horribly misplaced on g6 and subject of a mating attack. So here you see you cannot castle. Always understand that, always look out for such tricks whenever there's a bishop on d3. You could consider playing knight takes d4. This was actually seen in a game between Hovhannissian and Vaganian, played in Yerevan 2014. And the white player is actually an expert on this line. So this is probably some part of his preparation. The key idea for white now is that you can play g4. So this is very concrete. It's therefore useful to have included the move h3 already. So you got to take on f3, otherwise you lose the knight. Knight queen takes, bishop to g6, and now bishop takes g6, h takes g6, and knight takes d5. That is a good move. And here you see white is just better developed. King is in the center. Perhaps not immediate threats, although bishop g5 could be very unpleasant. So black castled, and now after knight takes e7, bishop takes e7, white could just capture a pawn on b7 with the queen. White's kingside is a bit exposed, but you can put the king on g2, bring the queen back to f3 at some point, get your pieces out, develop the bishop. I think that white is just a healthy pawn up. So I think this is still some sort of theory which was probably underestimated by black in this game. So after rook e1, black decided to take on f3. But this is of course also some sort loss of a tempo. Because you have, after h3, you have played this move bishop h5, and then you capture on f3. I think that black is in serious trouble here, because after queen takes f3, well, I believe this is like your last chance to get your king out of the center. You should do that, but white's position is definitely more pleasant, especially his bishop on d3 is very nice. You cannot take on d5, of course, because that leads to a typical trick with bishop h2 discovery check. But I think you can just play bishop e3, get the other rook into play. And of course there are some issues with the pawn on d5 in the long run. So maybe white will even play g3, king g2. White is more active, better developed. Pawn on d5 is vulnerable, and the knight on c6 isn't looking too great either. So white is better. But after knight takes d4, things are going pretty much downhill very fast. So knight takes d4, and now cute move queen takes d5. So you take the pawn. Yeah, and this is actually also critical, because well, bishop h2 doesn't make too much sense. Your knight isn't really hanging, so if you castle here, I will not take on d4 because of bishop h2 once again, and the queen is hanging. But yeah, I think I can just take on b7. That looks good for white. So black played ambitious move c6. So the knight is still untouchable, of course. But now, absolutely a key move, which might have been underestimated by black, as white played this move queen h5. I like this move a lot. Of course, castling kingside is met by checkmate. So here you have huge problems how to complete your development if you cannot really castle. So black went for queen d7. Feels like one of the very few other moves. You cannot really go knight e6 because there's always rook takes e6, making use of the pin. So queen d7 played. White went knight e4, bringing another piece into the attack. Very nice move. Still, of course, castling is not an option because of knight f6, and it's one more time checkmate. And you cannot castle queenside either, because if you do that, then okay, white will just take a pawn, and it's actually a very important pawn because after that a lot of pieces are hanging as well. White is very solid, so definitely no compensation for it. So after knight e4, black went for this move knight e6, trying to solidify his position by blocking the e-file, but it's an open center. It's time to get the pieces out, and white actually found a very nice move with the move bishop h6. Actually very good one. Of course, g takes h6 is met by knight f6, winning the queen. And if you're not reacting anyhow, white is just intending to capture on g7, followed by knight f6. So this is a big threat. You could consider castling here, because now the bishop is actually obstructing the mating threat on h7. But the simplest way is here to play knight takes d6. If you take with the queen on d6, then white can actually just take on h7. And if you take, there's discovery winning the queen. So in that case, you would have to take with the pawn on h6 instead of the knight on d6. But then you can simply take with the queen on h6, of course. So that is just game over as well. So still, you cannot castle. You cannot bring your king into safety to the other side of the board either. So black went for the move queen c7. So yeah, just sidestepping all this kind of tricks with bishop takes g7 and followed by knight f6. But white plays a very simple and strong move. He increases the pressure on the opponent. Bishop has basically done his job on d3, and now it's going to c4 to threaten to take on e6. If you castle now, of course, there was a tactical point, as you can just take on g7 still. So this is a little tactical justification. If you take with the knight, there's knight f6, king h8, and queen takes h7. So that doesn't work. And if you take with the king, you can just take on e6. And after f takes e6, there is knight g5, threatening to take with the knight on e6, or threaten to take with the rook on e6, or queen takes h7. It should be made very soon. So still impossible to castle kingside or get the king out of the center in general. So this is also part of the strategy. When your opponent has this king in the center, don't allow him to get it out of the center. So bishop c4. Well, bishop h2 was played, just securing the bishop. But the problem is that after king h1, well, the point was to offer the exchange of queens. That would, of course, be some sort of relief for black. But the problem is that white is not going to cooperate at all. Of course, point of queen e5 was to protect the knight as well. But after queen e5, white had a nice finishing touch with his move knight g5, which is just completely crushing, as you're attacking the queen. And basically whatever happens is that you can enter on on e6 on the next move, or take on f7. So it's actually quite a painful final position, but it very nicely shows that if you're too ambitious at an early stage, opting for your positional goals to be fulfilled, then you may actually suffer from basic principles. And this is actually what happened in the game, as Matthias Bluebaum just ignored his king safety and rather just played some moves in order to get some positional goals executed. But that's not the main priority. Just do first things first, and then try to consider your positional goals, but never neglect your king safety. That is a rule. Of course, we will get to see some examples where actually it isn't too bad to have the king still in the center, but then there are some other aspects which need to be taken into account. But whenever the center is quite open, there's an open file, then your king is lacking security from pawn protection. So that is something to keep in mind. In an open center, get your king out of the center.